Unless President Trump sits down for face-to-face negotiations with North Korean President Kim Jong-un, he's facing a quote-unquote nuclear catastrophe. That's the headline of this letter sent to the president by a half dozen experts with decades of involvement with that country. It reads in part, "Show good faith and jumpstart talks. The United States could send a high-level presidential envoy to North Korea. Washington should make clear that the United States does not have hostile intentions toward North Korea and wants to explore peaceful paths forward." Now, the signers include a number of heavyweights: diplomat Robert Gallucci, nuclear scientist Siegfried Hecker, U.S. Senator Richard Lugar, former Defense Secretary William Perry, former Secretary of State George Shultz, and my next guest, former UN Ambassador and New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. Governor, why do you endorse that strategy? Why do you think there might be something to gain from direct communications with Kim Jong-un?
I've negotiated with the North Koreans for the last 15 years. I've been there 8 times. They want to be seen as an equal power to the United States. They may not be, but they don't want interlocutors like China, like the six-party talks. They always want to be sort of the big guy in the region. Now, I admit that diplomacy is the best of a bunch of bad options, especially right now after the North Koreans mistreated that kid, Otto Warmbier. I was involved in that and trying to get him home, and he ends up in a coma and without an explanation for the North Koreans. I agree, Michael, with the Secretary of Defense. A preemptive military strike is catastrophic. Those were the words he used. You don't want this kind of outcome. And in between, what we've tried before, sanctions, increased sanctions, putting pressure on China, cyber efforts to degrade their nuclear capabilities, a lot of those options have not worked, but I think we have to continue towards a pace that eventually involves diplomacy. I think that's the only way out.
Is there more here than meets the eye? I mean, to my untrained eye from the sidelines, it looks like we have no conversation at the level you're advocating. In fact, are there overtures that get made from the United States to the North Koreans and vice versa that the public just wouldn't be aware of?
Well, I'm not an insider in the Trump administration. You know, they don't talk to me. But
right.
I suspect there are at the State Department mid-level with the UN representatives the North Koreans have. That did successfully, at least we got Otto Warmbier back home to his parents. But I think this is a role that the Chinese can play. I saw the European Union, maybe they can be mediators. We need new mediation there, Michael. I mean, right now, I don't think there's any direct high-level contact for sure, maybe lower level, but this is an area where the Chinese can help us, but they don't want to help us. They want turmoil in the region for us. They're doing as little as possible. Russia, too. At the United Nations, Russia and China, I was UN ambassador, just teamed up to block some serious sanctions that involve Chinese banks that would really squeeze the North Korean leadership. So, you know, the prospects are not great for any kind of lessening of tensions in the short term. But I think there is a strategy. There should be a strategy short term and long term, and I'll be glad to outline it if we get to that.
I'm curious as to how much we really know about Kim Jong-un, and I thought that my colleague Fareed Zakaria wrote something interesting for the Washington Post. I just want to quote a paragraph or two for you, Governor. He said, in Washington, there's a conventional wisdom on North Korea that spans both parties and much of elite opinion, and it goes roughly like this. North Korea is the world's most bizarre country, run by a crackpot dictator with a strange haircut. He's unpredictable and irrational and cannot be negotiated with. Eventually, this weird and cruel regime will collapse. Meanwhile, the only solution is more and more pressure. But what if the conventional wisdom is wrong? Perhaps the right way to look at North Korea is as a smart, rational, calculating government that is functioning shrewdly given its priority of regime survival. More pressure only strengthens its resolve to buy even more insurance. How to handle it under these circumstances? Does Fareed have a point?
He has a partial point, but I believe that there's somewhere in between a potential right answer. And that's where I think it is. One, he wants to keep his nuclear arsenal. He doesn't want to be another Iraq, Iran, Libya that gives it up because he thinks that weakens those countries. Secondly, he desperately wants to stay in power. We can see how he treats his political opponents. He kills them. He goes after his own family. So for some reason, he is still not sure of his legitimacy and leadership, even though it appears he has substantial support from the military, from the party. Third, he is unpredictable. He is somebody that nobody knows what makes him tick. The Chinese don't know. I mean, he snubs the Chinese. Look, Dennis Rodman is the only American that's ever talked to him. And my view is that there has to be an end game that he has. He can't just continue these efforts. I think he knows that he would be massively defeated by the United States, but he must want something, and his big card is his nuclear and missile capability. And in the end, I think, like his father, like his grandfather, he's going to say, okay, I'm the big player on the world stage. This is what I want. But I think there's got to be more sustained pressure for him to reach that point.
Final question. Can any amount of sanctions make an impact? When I hear the word sanctions, pardon me for an Animal House reference, I think of Dean Wormer putting the House on double secret probation. I mean, how many times are we going to try that before we realize it doesn't make an impact on this guy?
The only sanction that might have a little bit of bite, George Bush put it on the North Koreans, but it was taken out when we all started to negotiate. That is a sanction on Chinese banks that launder money into North Korea that gets to the North Korean leadership. You need the UN to get those done. And Russia and China would probably veto them. In other words, some sanctions on Chinese banks that do business with North Korea. After all, 80% of the commerce that goes into North Korea comes from China. China gives them food. China gives them economic assistance, coal. It gives them natural gas, energy. So China has that leverage, something that basically also says to China, okay, if you don't put some real sanctions on China, we're going to sanction you. Now, there are going to be costs to that because China's a big player commercially, trade-wise, especially in the region. So I think, I'll give credit to the president. He talked about, well, we're not going to list you as a currency manipulator. We're going to maybe put some steel sanctions if you don't help us. I think you've got to really put a little bite on the Chinese, and we haven't really done that yet. That's our best hope.
Governor Richardson.
A lot of bad options. Yeah.
Thank you for being here, Governor. I appreciate it.